So another reflection on the Strauss's second cave and the question of whether we can see whether Zizek is innocent of this second cave or whether it responds to some part of his philosophy, and also uh, what it means that the first cave may be included within the second cave. Derrida has said in his, we can remind ourselves in his Spectres of Marx that when Fukuyama wrote his text, this was already the third time that he had heard of it because he already heard of it from Kojeve. So we have some mention of Kojeve, but I won't go into that specifically. Kocheve's notion of, but just to say, Kochev has this notion also of the end of history. Zizek is usually sidestepping this by saying, "Oh, Hegel was not this idiot that believed history had ended." By I usually say somewhat dishonestly, um, giving the impression that the question about history is the question of empirical history, which obviously, of course, continues. Um, it's not even clear how it's intelligible to deny that. So obviously, Hegel isn't talking about just that uh, stuff continues to happen or the daily life continues to happen, but neither is he necessarily saying that there won't be, say, wars or events or news uh, items, things that newspapers will be interested to write about because they're not in keeping with the banality of what happens when everything goes well. But rather, the claim would be, but let's say the point here is what I want to get onto with Hegel is that we have a question which Strauss often raises when he gives a sort of an account of what Heidegger's what it would mean to go over to Heidegger's position. So what he'll say is something like, if we have knowledge, we have to be able to state the knowledge. So Hegel is, of course, very well known for this statement that if we have time, we have to write it down, and then we know that we have time. We write down now it is 2 o'clock on a certain day in a certain year, and then time radiates from that statement. And truth likewise would have to be stated in this way, but for Strauss, what this would mean is that you'd be writing something about an idea which has an identity, and that you would be tacitly admitting admitting a form of the idea of time which first appears probably in Plato, um, that there's eternity as set in contradistinction to the so-called moving image of eternity. The hair grows on the head, it falls out, it grows back. The body dies, the new bodies come in. Um, this is kind of the point in Heidegger about death. We all have some sense that we're part of an association of people. There's people before us, there'll be people after us. In some way, we can lose ourselves in this notion that will be repeated rather than that we're unique and have some variety of qualities and some diversity of experiences which will never be repeated and will simply cease to exist totally. In the same way, all the leading ideas in Plato, once they're stated, once they're put into some kind of systematic time notion through the logos, through a specific kind of word which understands in a specific way what identity means, and these so-called first philosophy in Aristotle and the metaphysics are worlds of thought, as Millerman translated from in Dugan in the chapter we looked at it a few recordings ago. the principle of identity would have to hold with regard to, say, I think Strauss goes into the question of war, for instance, as an idea in natural right and history. And, if there's such a thing as war, then there's such a thing as a general, then we can analyze that in a sort of cataphantic way, which is the coming down from the idea to the specifics and asking, in the same way that we ask, say, if the liver, we assume that the liver has some function. The liver is supposed to remove the bile from the blood, clean things out, and then we can know in that way whether it's going wrong. If we have always this thing which Nietzsche says is one of the jackass forms, that we have this notion that there's an eternity, and we somehow paint these things on. The liver has a teleology, just like war would have a teleology, just like decay or justice would have a teleology, and then you can say when it's going wrong or going right, and that this is part of the jackassery of, according to Nietzsche. But Heidegger and Strauss tried to I think Heidegger and Strauss tried to struggle with Nietzsche and tried to show that there's something else we can do here. And so, but in connection to Zizek, Zizek said in one of his early, in his first film, I think, that we in our time are always somehow in a strange way, maybe even in a unheimlich or uncanny way, remembering that Heidegger has taken the word unheimlich and swapped it out for the word thalmazein in Greek, the idea that philosophy begins with wonder, according to Aristotle. Zizek is saying we're somehow in our time, in our ideology, always orienting ourselves against Hegel as the enemy. So Hegel is the enemy because he has proposed the notion of the teleological history and the end of history. It's not necessary, and so usually, in fact, the issue of the end of history is held in abeyance, as it were, in suspense most of the time. But it's still the idea of progress implies teleology. It implies the things that happened earlier are the inadequate forerunners for the things that will happen now. So, in a strong example, which impresses most of us, is true, you'd have something like Ptolemy has had, or Aristotle, and then Ptolemy has had these system of the sun in the center of the universe, and then we've made some progress, and now we know that the universe spans out beyond the visible stars, and that we're in our solar system. We should regard ourselves as circling the sun. Sorry, I misstated that, but rather than the Earth in the center, the sun in the center, and this is the progress. In the earlier system, at least, they tried to ask the question of what's in the center, and then based on that inadequate try, we made an improvement. So everything like that. And what you'll usually hear from professors when they talk about German historicism is something like, what they mean is teleology and history, and then what they point to is something like the practical question of the developed and the undeveloped world, or whether Brazil should follow the same path of economic development, and then the whole Knock-Holen revolution question in Habermas, the catch-up revolution. So should everybody be catching up to the model of the point which is the most advanced and is most like, by analogy, most like the discovery of the heliocentric reality of circling the planet, how the planets operate, how the planetary system operates. Zizek is often in his own work undermining this, and therefore I think in a certain way bringing out the despondency of the situation of the throwing off of the Hegelian, because Hegel took over from Kant, prepared the way Strauss says in Kant, history raised its head at the gate of history, and then Hegel took off from there. So the despondency of the sense that we've lost something in losing the notion of the teleological history, which is also the notion of progress, which then also superimposes itself over all kinds of political questions of which then appear as pragmatic questions, although um, the pragmatic always would seem to imply this Nietzschean jackass, which puts over an organ notion onto every identity. So, in a way, Strauss is asking whether the identities can be forever held out. And I think I would like to look at something if I get, I don't have time now, in a comparison to this heresy of the Nestorian heresy. I think the Nestorian heresy, where it's denied that there can be any separation between the logos, Christ's logos, and the body, because they have to come into a perfect identity with, so that Christ can be God, um, is not merely a metaphysical or a theological question, but it has a direct sense, which we can attempt to transform, let the transformation of it place us into being, as Heidegger would say, and see how this notion is still alive. So I'll try to do something on the Nestorian heresy in connection to this. So all these questions about whether the first cave is still there would circle around whether we have to have an interpretation of Plato to state what the first cave is, whether we're really so whether we're already involved in this second cave when we're interpreting Plato, right? Um, because of time limitations, I didn't actually say too much about the first cave being in the second cave, but that was just mainly an attempt to see if there's any redoubling in Zizek of the same problems under different avenues of address, under different way of thinking about it, but still fundamentally the same world problem.